Ready to go. So welcome to Samantha, over to you now.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Jane and the Mindfulness Association for giving me the opportunity to do this evening, and thank you to you for coming along as well. I graduated in November 2021, which I can't believe is almost 3 years ago. And I completed this dissertation through COVID as well, which brought challenges, which I'll touch on briefly. But I just wanted to say thank you because it was a lot of work and I really enjoyed doing it. I don't know how I did it now when I look back with a very full-on full-time job, but it's really been wonderful. I was saying to Jane to just have the opportunity to re-engage with the research. And unfortunately also feel a little bit of some of this stuff is still going on as well for female leaders. But anyway, thank you again for making the time to come along and hear about this. So please feel free to ask questions, or I don't know how Jane does it. Maybe we do it at the end. Yes, okay, without further ado. So let me start by, I've got three parts to my introduction. One is to, I suppose, set the scene for, the gender gap in leadership. Now, bear in mind, this was a moment in time when I conducted this in 2020 into 2021. But as I said, not an awful lot has changed. I don't know, of course, if any of you have embarked on the MSc, but I remember very clearly being told as students that you really ought to do something that you're interested in, because it's a lot of work and the commitment and the time that you need to put into it. You really need to do something that interests you. So I just wanted to share with you my motivation for this research, and then how I came to mindfulness as a potential solution on this. So let me start with the gender gap in leadership. And as you can see there, according to the World Economic Forum, so it could take 202 years before we actually close the global gender pay gap. And I'm also, and since doing this, I've become chair of a gender equity policy organisation up here in Scotland called Close the Gap. So I've actually even got closer to this, and people often get confused about pay equality versus gender pay gap, because women often get trapped in the lower income jobs as well, and that's where some of the sort of equity doesn't come in. So it's not necessarily about equal pay, because of course we have laws around that, but also that for me, I've spent my whole career working until recently in commercial organizations. But for me, as I was looking at this, it was kind of looking at the business case. So not only should there be equality here and equity, but actually look at the potential that this can bring to the workplace, with that, just in the UK, 150 billion for GDP. And then, another example of the gap of the board members, which is slightly better now. But that kind of got me really thinking about, okay, well, what's going on there with the gender gap in leadership? And then coming on to like why I wanted to do this. And I think I'd been on a journey with starting the MSc. I'd been a mindfulness practitioner and thought, oh, yes, actually, why don't I do an MSc in it? Didn't really think it through that much, but I'm so glad I did it now. I've noticed personally how becoming more mindful enabled me to understand more about me, and how it had helped me to change and understand more about myself, understanding my mind and my thoughts and the impact it has on me and my actions in the workplace. I was a senior leader in a bank at the time, and how it's made me more discerning to choose which thoughts I want to do anything with versus those that I can kind of just, you know, allow them to arise and then let me go. I think also as I started to sort of try and home in on a question, because leadership, of course, is a huge topic. I thought about, you know, me and what might be holding me back generally and have held me back in my career. And of course, there are a number of things, but I thought about myself, and I thought about some of the feedback that I'd had over my more senior career, and how I'd often been told that I avoided positive recognition. So I started to think about self-promotion. And then I thought about, you know, there's been over the years, and certainly this is what I discovered as I was writing my essays as well. I very much focused on leadership and innovation in the workplace. I thought applying something different in the corporate world that didn't just look at mindfulness with stress reduction, burnout, all of which are important, aka productivity, to look at a different solution, I suppose, or a way in which mindfulness could help. And also there was a gap in the research. So whilst there's been, you know, there's a body, there was never a huge amount, but there was enough of a body for me to be able to have it for a dissertation on mindfulness and leadership. Nothing had focused specifically on female leaders. Well, I suppose not a surprise there, but the impact it could have. So that, coupled with looking into self-promotion and finding that discomfort with self-promotion was well researched, I thought, okay, right, well, that's essentially what I'm going to do. So then I came on to thinking about mindfulness as a potential solution around help people with self-promotion, because I'd landed on how important self-promotion can be in the workplace, particularly in large organizations. And as we go through this today, I'll share some of the inhibitors to that, which very much fall, I'm not generalizing here, but very much fall amongst females. There are males who have it as well, of course, just like there are females who don't feel that reluctance. But as I started to think about this, and as mindfulness had been associated with increased levels of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, you know, critical around leadership, I wanted to understand if that was the experience of the leaders, and how could mindfulness therefore shift their leadership and ultimately help their career progression. So could it provide relief? Could it really help their leadership? So could it go a step further and help them, that those that are struggling as well because of the challenges faced in the modern world of being a senior female in business? And then coming on to you know, recognizing in the research again that mindfulness can help leaders to become more adaptable and accepting of change, which is critical, and especially now more than ever, given the pace of change. And if we just think about, I've often worked in sort of technology areas of business, but that's impacting all of our lives, no matter what company you're in, or even in your personal life as well. But from a leadership point of view, if mindfulness can help them become more adaptable and accepting of change, then that's interesting as well. And then finally, around sort of the ability to be flexible as well, because of course, as I expect we all know, you know, change is inevitable, nothing is permanent. So we have to be able to flex in the modern world. So I wanted to, you know, that also kind of fed into this. Okay, I think that's what I really want to look at here, is but home in on this self-promotion, and how might a mindfulness intervention help female leaders with self-promotion, and in turn help their leadership, right? So in terms of my methodology, the next slide, thanks, Jane. So I decided that to take an approach with qualitative research, so that I could gain a richer understanding of their phenomenological, I always struggle with that word, experience of their practice. I really wanted to understand their lived experience within the context of their workplace, their interactions with the people that they led, with the people who lead them, and of course their peers as well. So I wanted to also make it self-led. I was limited somewhat because of COVID, because it was in 2020, sort of in the first half of 2020. So essentially what I did was I gave all the participants the Mindfulness Association mobile app, and they were asked to practice for at least, as you can see there, 15 minutes per day, and to do that every day where they could for 8 weeks. So I had 10 participants. They were all female, and you can see the age group there. And I had some new leaders, but I also had a couple of seasoned chief execs as well. So I had a really interesting group of people there in terms of their leadership experience as well. I also asked them to keep a journal, and I didn't use that journal to inform. I didn't collect that in. I just asked them as part of the as part of their practice to just write a journal. And that was useful in a couple of ways, because it enabled them to reflect. And that was really interesting, that came out of the research. But really also it was so that they could remember as well. And I checked in with them every couple of weeks, just as kind of a well-being, and just to make sure that they were doing the practice. Was there anything that they needed? Just to make sure, I wasn't going to reach the end and start doing the conducting the interviews and discover that 6 out of the 10 of them, or maybe even more, hadn't followed through. So I collected the data through in-depth semi-structured interviews, and I'll take you through the themes that I identified there, because it was a thematic analysis, and I took an inductive approach to coding the data, because I wanted to see, I wanted to allow things to emerge. I was also, being a mindfulness practitioner myself, I was also very aware and consciously aware of, as I went through the analysis of the interviews, and even conducting the interviews, of my conscious bias, or some of my unconscious bias came through. So I was really really conscious of that, to ensure that because I am one of them too, that I wasn't bringing any of that to it. I mean, there's only so much one can do, because I'm a human being at the end of the day, but I was very conscious of that. So as I went through the interviews, or rather getting ready for the interviews, and through my literature review, I addressed these questions. So I wanted to understand what their practice helped them to learn about their leadership behaviors. So what did they learn about themselves, right, if anything, as they went, as they had been through this. I also wanted to establish if a regular practice could positively impact this sort of recognition of yeah, I've actually done quite well, at work, and also recognize that there's the future potential, that I've got the potential to also do well as well in the future, which is all part of this kind of self-promotion. I also wanted to understand, and again, you'll appreciate this came up through the literature review, what extent does mindfulness have the ability to break or relieve gender modesty norms. And I will go into that a little bit more, because what came up through my research was that that can be an inhibitor. So again, you know, not every female is the same, not every woman is the same, but I learned that can hold people back. So could it relieve those or even break them? And this next point as well is, could mindfulness actually mitigate or reduce the need? Because what I discovered was that a number of leaders will avoid self-promotion because they don't want the backlash. They don't want people going, "Oh, look at her blowing her own trumpet," that kind of thing. They were very concerned with how they would be perceived, and just didn't want any negativity around that. So I just want to touch on that a little bit more in terms of my findings through the literature review. So I identified these 4 inhibitors to self-promotion. So as I've touched on, the first one is the gendered behaviour norms. So many women believe or have been socially conditioned to conform to their gender behaviour expectations. And that's supported by some research from Smith and Hunting in 2013. And in particular, demonstrating modesty in order to be accepted as a leader and a good colleague. So learned behaviour that if I'm modest, then, you know, I'm more likely to be accepted. So, but of course, if you're modest, then immediately that's an inhibitor to self-promotion. So other gendered behaviour norms examples can be selflessness and not displaying anger. And research has shown that though that has also contributed to the gender gap in self-promotion as well. But there is an argument by Heilman that unlike competent men, who tend to be seen merely as non-communal and agentic. So, oh yeah, he's got agency. You know, they're seen as competent as well. But forthright women, when we're like that, then we're often seen as counter-communal, and we can be negatively perceived. So there are still many gender stereotypes at play in the workplace. But we can be seen as passive if we wait to make a decision. But research has shown that that's prudent if seen from a man. So self-confidence is another one, you know, and that's part of that kind of holding back and not believing in ourselves, and therefore better not to kind of shout about anything and talk about, you know, that's what we're talking about here with self-promotion. It's not woohoo, it's kind of like, hey, I've done a really good piece of work here. Did you see that? Or, you know, I'd like to be able to present this, etc. You know, but that confidence holds back, and what contributes to that as well is this avoidance of this backlash that I've just touched on. And then finally, the imposter phenomenon. It's commonly called the imposter syndrome, but its correct nomenclature is a phenomenon. So this is the presence of this and the belief that she's simply not good enough, or you know, thinking that if I draw attention to myself, then I'm going to get found out, right? But actually, I shouldn't really be here. And I have heard this from a CEO in a very large organization who wasn't part of this research, but that person shared this with me a few years ago. And that can also be an inhibitor to self-promotion. So, you know, it's believing you don't deserve credit for your achievements as well. You're not intelligent. You've got this internal story that you're a fraud. You know, when am I going to get found out? All of that. And what Clance and Imes also identified was that achievements are attributed to luck or serendipity rather than competence or achievement. So another inhibitor there. The expected finding that came through this was this team orientated mindset. I'll come back to that a bit later, but every participant referenced these factors throughout the interviews without me having to explicitly ask them, with the most frequent being self-confidence and imposter phenomenon. So that was really interesting. But yeah, this team-orientated mindset, which was one of my conclusions, actually. So I will come back to that. So if we can move to the next slide, please, Jane. So I just wanted to share a few of the direct quotes that relate to those inhibited. So, I'll read them out, but of course you can read them. But I don't just want people to think that I'm overly confident or too full of myself. So that, again, this societal expectation for women to be modest hinders their opportunity. I think there's something there about a bit of modesty. I'm much better about promoting my team and my team efforts than I am promoting myself. So there's that kind of team thing coming through. So there's no modesty there when it's about we, it's about us, not just them. I do have times when I probably wouldn't be as confident as people think I am. I'm proud of what I do, and I definitely think I'm good at what I do, but how do I show it? I don't know how I let people know that. So an interesting one there in terms of I feel it, but I just don't feel like I've got the mechanic to be able to do it. I have a bit of imposter syndrome, and it was a bit like I never would have applied for this. It never would have been my choice. And this was related to somebody applying for a job that had somebody not said to them, you would be great for that. You should apply for it. They were just like, I'm sorry, are you talking to me? And at this one, I remember coming home to my husband and saying, I think they think I'm a lot better than I am because they've just offered me this huge big chunk of money, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what are they expecting? So immediately it's like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough for this. And then finally, this rationale, right, for not self-promoting. The more senior you get, if you take credit for everything, you're the worst leader ever. So equating self-promotion with taking credit, because you can't do it all by yourself. You can't pretend that you're going to do it all by yourself. I don't run away from it, but I don't go running towards it to get praise. I don't go and get praise. So you can see really what's going on here. What happened? What happened as they had become these regular, certainly for the 8 weeks, mindfulness practitioners. So 5 key themes emerged, and as you can see there, and I will go through each of those. So there was an enhanced self-awareness. So the findings showed that over time, a regular mindfulness practice could have a positive impact on the ability to self-promote, but it was more indirectly through enhanced self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is recognizing what you're good at, is recognizing what you know, and that can increase self-confidence. So they are a little bit different, but it influences self-confidence. But improved self-confidence came through. I don't expect this group will be surprised as well, but what came through was increased empathy and compassion for others. So it's thinking about that on your ability to lead, and how can that change your leadership? How can that make you a better leader as well? And then greater inner calm and clarity. So again, in the context of leading people through really difficult times, which is what was happening at this time, and I know is still happening today. So being able to have that can help leadership. And then finally, this motivation came through to practice self-care. What I saw, or rather what came through the research, was that there was this emergence of positive emotions and behaviors, right, that can enhance leadership performance, which gave them greater clarity and feelings of control. So they started to feel much more in control, and that contributed to an increase in their own self-belief. There was also an easing of negative thoughts and behaviors, which may have previously reinforced the self-promotion inhibitors. You know, if we think about, you know, imposter phenomenon, for example, they actually discovered a better understanding of themselves and their self-leadership, as well as a recognition of their habits and behaviors. So what came through was that on their journey, there was a range of previously untapped soft skills that they had surfaced into their awareness, making them more self-aware. So this development of self-awareness actually facilitated a clear recognition of their abilities. They saw themselves better, essentially. And that surfaced this knowledge that they had performed well in their careers to date, rather than just thinking about the now and maybe something really tricky that they were dealing with. And they then did see their potential for their future. They noticed they were calmer, they developed greater empathy for their team and their personal connections as well. Because what was the context of this was them at work as leaders. Of course, you know, they are their full self. So they noticed what came through in their life outside of work as well. And they recognized that self-care was not self-indulgent. And that was how they'd thought about it before, but actually critical for their general well-being and for their professional performance. So they started to see the whole thing, which has the potential, of course, of aiding both their leadership of others and could facilitate the development of a foundation of compassion at work and self-leadership capabilities as well. And I've got some research in the literature to back that up. So I just wanted to go into this a little bit more detail. I think we're okay for time. Thank you. Good job. I've got more time. So the first one, I just wanted to break these two down a little bit: self-awareness and self-confidence. So you can see there just some examples that I've pulled out there. The next day I said to my partner, I'm so chuffed with that. I've written it. The structure's good. And I think someone's going to pick that up and say, oh yeah, let's interview her. So basically what had happened there was that the leader who had decided to apply for this job, and she hadn't got one 6 months before. So she felt a bit, but somebody had encouraged her, and she stayed up till 3 a.m. in the morning. It was just like, this is brilliant. And she said, I just felt this real, just real belief came through. So it was a really interesting example. And here we go, another one. I started to realize there are more skills that I have. So that's that kind of self-efficacy coming through. And I just needed to do it rather than having somebody else do it. So realizing that she could actually do these things. There was one participant that said that she put so much preparation into meetings that she was attending that she arrived with really high stress levels, but through her practice, she was calming her mind and realized that her preparation techniques, they weren't helpful, and they actually contributed to her stress levels. She'd say, my desk would be covered in like hundreds of post-it notes because I was just panicking, and I was just like, no, you've got this. You know, that's a really good example of, you know, just again, that build of both self-awareness and self-confidence. So there was this real shifting away from habitual familiar behaviors and automated patterns towards a more conscious and intentional way of behaving. And that helped to relieve the modesty, because they became aware of their good performance, and actually a reduced fear of failure, because they knew that they were good. And if they failed, it was okay, because I've done good stuff. And being able to cope with failure, really important in the workplace. So in terms of increased empathy and compassion for others, so it's raising my awareness amongst others. When I notice somebody had gone the extra mile for me, I'll call that out and I'll leave them feedback. I'm more thoughtful about highlighting that to others too. I'm worried about my team getting a good work-life balance. I'm feeling a bit of a better leader. I feel like I'm supporting my team better. I think it's making me more want to understand other people's situations rather than make judgments about it. It facilitated a shift towards simple and practical ways to support their followers. They became more proactive in looking out for their well-being. And there was this emergence of their interconnectedness, this understanding that people are trying to do their best job. They started to see their team, really, really see them. And a number of the leaders actually indicated that they were more aware of putting themselves in their followers' shoes, and they saw this as a different way of approaching their leadership. And some of this had led to really good improvements in their interpersonal relationships. And there's a piece of research by Boyatzis and McKee from 2006 there. It highlighted that mindfulness could have a downstream impact on cognition, emotion, and behavior, and thereby positively influence relationships and well-being in the workplace. So whilst there was little evidence of a new awareness of their leadership style, this intervention, it's fair to say, contributed to a shift in how they interacted with their teams. And then on the inner calm and clarity, so you can see there, I'm more rational in my thinking. So I feel I've always had to make decisions quite quickly, but I feel I'm more considered. So they were giving themselves the space and time, and they feel that they were more rational because of it, because it brought this, the calm coupled with the clarity. I've tried to stop myself getting angry and annoyed about things that I can't actually control. So that's been quite liberating. It was music to my ears when I heard that. It was just, wow, right? Wow. So there was this emergence of calmness, even when they were required to act at speed, which again agreed with the research. And energy to focus, right? Critical as a leader, critical in the workplace. Self-criticism was actually a familiar behavior amongst the leaders, particularly when it came to improving their work. But what emerged was a recognition they'd learned to focus their time on what was needed and when it was needed. And some of them learned to say no as well. So, as she says there, I think when you're calm, you're more in control. One comes with the others. And she talked about, just being able to say no. One leader shared how punctuating her day with 3 15-minute mindfulness practices, beginning and ending her workday with meditation, had enabled her to finish her workday feeling calm. So she was able to stop and not go into the evening thinking, I've got to do this, that, and the other. She didn't mean she'd completed everything, but she felt confident that she could pick it up in the morning. And she saw this as an intentional creation of the boundaries between work and home, which of course in turn increased her emotional well-being. And she shared that she'd been sleeping better as well. So they noticed that their default way of working wasn't optimal for their emotional well-being, as they started to see their working habits. And develop that ability to let go and relax rather than cling on and control. So, there was this emerging sense of calmness for them. And then finally, the final theme that came through here, was this motivation to practice self-care, as I've said, because I included this because I think it can have the potential to address all the inhibiting factors that I've identified to self-promotion. Because their shift in perspective to thinking about themselves, I believe, has the potential to build resilience, which in turn could start to relieve the gender modesty norms, and mitigate that backlash avoidance, and reduce imposter phenomenon. So, and researchers, there's a body of research around self-care being an impactful tool for self-leadership. So they shifted from seeing some behaviors as selfish to redefining them as self-care and recognizing it as important for themselves and others around them, as a way to cope with, and Chesley and Wilson 2016 noticed this as well. Mindful leaders practice self-care as a way to cope with challenging work environment and business challenges as well. Because one leader referenced after a 20 plus year career, she'd concluded she wasn't good at making time for herself and doing beneficial activities that would contribute positively to her as a leader. And that helped her and other participants to understand how it influenced their leadership performance. So if we can move on, Jane, please, to the conclusion. So while mindfulness might not directly motivate women to self-promote, for my conclusion, where I got to with my research was that it can indirectly support the career progression. Because just as a reminder, self-promotion is one part of what can help your career progression, especially within an organization. And it does that by supporting self-awareness and self-confidence. Because if you've got that understanding of who you are and that real belief, then that can absolutely help you to not feel afraid, and all those inhibitors. It can mitigate those. But what I found through this research was not self-promotion, but we promotion, where came through very much, where the focus is on promoting the team's achievements rather than individual accomplishments. So this concept actually resonates with the participants' team-oriented mindset. Now, whether that's a female thing or not, there's some research, but certainly it came through in all of those 10 people. But that could be an alternative to traditional self-promotion for women who actually find it uncomfortable. And I think, in terms of future research, yes, this was a moment at time. It was done during COVID. It was, not a huge group. So I think there's probably some quant study to be done here. But I think also exploring mindfulness as a component of a broader program around how can we help more female leaders to progress. What areas can we work on, and taking very much a gendered approach, I think, is worth exploring too. So finally, if we can go to the final slide, this really summed it up for me. The more senior you get in the company, if you take credit for everything, you're the worst leader ever, because you can't do it all by yourself. You can't pretend that you're going to do it all by yourself. I don't run away from it, but I don't go running towards it to get praise. And that was one of my participants. And it very much came through that, I don't want to take credit. Self-promotion isn't right for the way that I want to be perceived as a leader. But this is how I will promote. This is how I will show the brilliant work that gets done from me as a leader. So thank you. Any questions?